And welcome back to another episode of the Total Sports Live podcast. This is Jovan Alford, and you see who I'm joined by with. Well, not see if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll be seeing this. But if you're listening, I'm joined by Harrison Brown and Keaton Nichols talking fantasy football. Yes, folks, it is that time of the year. If you was with us last year and you was listening to the podcast, hopefully you was and were subscribed. We, talked some fantasy. We did our NFL season preview, which was really fun. None of our predictions really came out correctly. I think we were all mad about the Broncos not making it to the playoffs. That was a really good bet that had some life with Teddy Bridgewater, but it went down the drain very quickly in the second half. And then after that, me and Keaton had branched off and did a fantasy pod for like when it was like for like I feel like it was like the first 6 weeks of the season or something like that.
Good half of the season at least.
Yeah, it was a good half of the season.
Yeah,
we were giving you guys waiver wire ads to pick up, and I don't want to toot our own horns, but we was out here dropping anytime touchdown prop bets like it was nothing last year.
Oh man, you made a lot of money. I'm saying if you stuck with us,
you did.
That's all I'm saying.
You definitely did. So we're back this year talking some fantasy. Our official, we're gonna call this our annual fantasy football special. We're going to have a good one, but before we do that, make sure you're following us on Twitter at Total Sports Live and checking out the podcast on Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, and on anchor.fm/TSL Podcast. Make sure you follow us there. Appreciate everybody that's tuning in and listening to. Like I said, joined by Harrison and Keaton. Fellas, how are you doing? It's been a minute since I had this trio mixture together on a podcast, but excited to talk some fantasy. We just wrapped up our draft, and obviously there's more drafts still going on, still coming up. So we're in the weeds right now as we get prepared for week 1, which starts on September 8th, and then the full slate on Sunday begins a few days later.
Yeah, I'm excited about it, Jovan. This is the time of year when everything comes alive again in many ways, right? Like when football season goes dark in February, like there's so much celebration around the Super Bowl, you just don't realize what that cliff is of emotion when you don't have football for several months. But every time we start to have the fantasy football conversations, when you text the group chat, like, all right, you already know what time of year it is, time to get those deposits in, time to think about who you're going to draft. It's going to be a snake. Here's the time. Like it's wonderful. You can almost smell it in the air. I'm excited, Jovan. I'm excited.
Definitely. I think we all, have that same excitement and enthusiasm for this fantasy year because Harrison, welcome back to the pod. It's been this for the entire summer. I think we can all share that enthusiasm because we just don't know what's going to happen this year. There's so many different players and new situations, rookies. There isn't it unlike other previous years. It feels like, it just feels as if there's just a lot of unknowns because there's a lot of good situations happening and a lot of very good players are in the league this year.
Man, you're absolutely right. First things first, great to be here with you guys. Keaton, really appreciate you coming on tonight. But you're absolutely right, Jovan. I think there's a lot of parity in the NFL right now. I think that's one thing that they really strive for. I think, at the end of the day, everybody's got a pretty talented roster. There's some guys that you can talk about for fantasy purposes on all 32 teams. So I think we should get into it, man. This is going to be a good one.
We definitely should get into it. And first things first, we got to talk about the newcomers with the biggest impact on their team this offseason, fellas. We saw a whole bunch of player movement. It did not waste any time as we got into draft season and even when we got into free agency. We saw a lot of different players changing jerseys. You might have thought it was NBA free agency with the amount of moves that we saw. But we have pointed out and picked out a few, player movements or guys at new teams that we believe could have the biggest impact in fantasy this season. So Harrison, I'm gonna start with you. Who do you have as that newcomer who can make the biggest impact on their team this season, fantasy wise? That is.
Yeah, I'll start it out. This is a guy who's been making plays in fantasy really since 2017 when he became a full-time starter, and that's Tyreek Hill joining the Miami Dolphins. Obviously, he's been making plays out in Kansas City for years. And I know that there's going to be some concerns about what Tyreek Hill can do due to the quarterback play. They're worried about what Tua is going to do this year. I think one of the stats that really stuck out to me and why I'm still all in on not just Tyreek Hill, but also Jalen Waddle and some other guys in that Dolphins offense like Chase Edmonds as well, is just the increase that we saw in Alex Smith's game, especially on deep passes from 2016 to 2017.
Mm-hmm.
2016, 29.5% completion percentage, 10.3 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions for Alex Smith on deep passes. That's the year Tyreek was a rookie, not really playing as much, making some plays on special teams, getting acclimated to the NFL. The next year, Tyreek becomes a full-time starter. Alex Smith led the NFL with a 49.2% completion percentage, 21.2 yards per attempt, 11-0 touchdown to interception ratio, and a 134.7 passer rating on deep passes. So that's just kind of a small sample size. Obviously, Alex Smith was at a very different point in his career than Tua, but you can kind of just see what adding Tyreek to an offense can do for you, especially when you're pushing the ball downfield. And these deep shots don't all have to be vertical shots. You can just get the ball to Tyreek on a quick little slant pass, let him go 70, 80 yards. So I'm really intrigued by Tyreek Hill. I think he's going to elevate that offense. Obviously, with their new head coach, Mike McDaniels, I'm intrigued to see what that offense just looks like in general with him coming from that San Francisco tree. But I'm all in on Tyreek Hill this year.
Tyreek Hill is a good one because, like you said, he's leaving a situation in Kansas City where, he had the big arm quarterback. They were playing in a free-flowing, it almost was like a Golden State Warriors type of offense where it was almost like positionless football at the skill positions. Anybody can get open, and good luck because you got to worry about Travis Kelce. You got to worry about Tyreek Hill. You also got to worry about Mecole Hardman. Like, defense had to choose. In Miami, people might not see it that way. However, like you mentioned, with a guy like Tyreek Hill, you don't have to necessarily go deep every time. You get him run yards and run after the catch. And we saw Jalen Waddle thrive in that almost last season. He had 104 receptions on 40 targets, over 1,000 yards, 6 touchdowns, 74.3 catch percentage. A guy that, again, he wasn't going deep a lot, but he was able to create and became one of those, solid fantasy guys that we saw last year. You, Keaton, who do you think, is a newcomer when it comes to, fantasy this year on their new team and new situation?
I really like that Tyreek Hill pick too. Also, for one more reason, we're gonna see like what Tua's all about. I really feel like that's the complete piece, and we'll see what Tyreek is like outside of that Mahomes environment as well. So I think that's a good one. But I'm looking forward to Russell Wilson, my man, Russell Wilson. I mean, I think you have to love the situation that you have in Denver over the past, let's say, Manningless seasons since the Super Bowl, which is all of them. You have these Denver teams that have been so solid defensively. They've been so solid in the run game, but they just haven't had a quarterback that could hit the side of a barn if they tried. And obviously it's an over-exaggeration, but I mean, still, you're saying to yourself, this Broncos team, as we predicted last year, was like, man, it would be really nice to see this team get to the playoffs. But it was so dependent upon how good of play of a performance could they get from the quarterback position over the course of 16 games, no matter who that is. You've got one of the most consistent quarterbacks over spans of 16 games that you can get in the NFL. Even last year, in a year which could be probably forgotten in his Hall of Fame career, that he has 25-6 last year with a 65% completion percentage. Imagine what he's going to do in a new offense where he has a defense that's going to be very active, that's going to be continually handing him back the football, and to continually make plays. If you're looking for a more consistent quarterback in the NFL, a more consistent quarterback, you're not going to find it outside Russell Wilson. So I think that's going to be a huge impact, not just on the team's overall success. I think the record's going to be great this year. But in addition to that, how are these fantasy playmakers like Jerry Jeudy, how are they going to handle this new offense? I think it's going to be very well. And I think Russell will cook. Russ will cook.
Oh, Russ will definitely cook. And, and it's interesting because a lot of people weren't talking about him as we got in the fantasy draft or even watching different fantasy shows. It was almost like he just flew under the radar. And it's like, okay, granted, right, he doesn't have DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. However, one could make the case that he's now in a more complete offense with a Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon at running back too, who's not a slouch in any sense of the matter. Albert O at tight end. I don't want to say his name to butcher it, so I'm going to just say Albert O. And then wide receiver, we saw what the wide receivers they do last year with Teddy Bridgewater, what the type of year Tim Patrick had, even though he won't be there this year because he tore his ACL, which is just devastating because it seemed like he was on poise to have another good season. But you mentioned Russ is probably, like you said, one of the more consistent safe plays in fantasy. And like you said, those pass catchers are going to all get a boost. Jerry Judy's going to all get a boost. Cortland Sutton's going to get a boost. Albert O, who, was solid, but again, he's playing behind Noah Fant. He's going to get a boost. Another guy who's going to get a boost is KJ Hamler, a guy that no one's talking about. He missed all of last year. He missed basically all last season with, him suffering a knee injury, last year, and a dislocated hip too. It was a 2-4 injury against the Panthers. So he'll be back fully healthy. And I forgot who I told this to somebody. I said, KJ Hamler could be Russell Wilson's Tyler Lockett.
That was the comp I was thinking of as well. That was exactly the comp I was thinking of. Yeah, just speed out of the slot as well. I think could be amazing. Again, somebody that could actually throw him the football, not just in the general area.
Russ can probably throw one of the better deep balls in the league.
Yeah. I mean, especially you got those monsters on the outside. I think it just sets up so well for so many parts of this offense, especially as you mentioned. I didn't even mention Noah Fant as well, who I think is just going to go from really good potential talent to something amazing as well in the next couple of years. So again, it opens up opportunities for a guy like Hamler and a lot of other playmakers in this offense. But one of the things that you can say for sure about this Denver Broncos offense from a fantasy perspective is that Russ is going to eat in this offense, whether it's going to Fant or Judy or Sutton or Hamler, whatever it is. I think, Russell's going to end up top 3 and might not be 3. In terms of quarterback performance this year. That's my bold prediction early in the pod.
What do you think, Harrison? Is he on the right track with the bold prediction of Russ being a top 3 fantasy quarterback? I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility when you look at what he's done over the last few years. Obviously, last year was down, but the previous season, 359 fantasy points, 328 in 2019, 298 in 2018, 347 in 2017. You now give him a complete offense with a bunch of young talent around him. Sky's the limit.
No, I'm there with you guys. I think Russ has been a pretty solid 25 points per game quarterback in fantasy over the past few years. Even like Keaton mentioned last year, which you can probably forget about from his season. And Keaton did a great job breaking down the roster. I'll just go to the coaching staff and say Nathaniel Hackett is joining Russ, and he just coached Aaron Rodgers during 2 of his MVP seasons. It's kind of the first coach off that Matt LaFleur coaching tree. I'm not fully convinced Nathaniel Hackett's going to be a great NFL coach, but it's certainly not a bad guy to come work with if he's coming off 2 years working with Aaron Rodgers in a system that works very well. Let's transition that from one Hall of Fame quarterback to another. Let's see what he can do with Russell Wilson. You guys mentioned it. It's a very talented offense. They have playmakers. You know what I mean? They're not lacking playmakers, even though it's not DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. There's a group. And if we see guys like KJ Hamler take that next step, Javonte Williams is a guy who everybody's really excited about in fantasy this year. Can he take that next step and really prove that he's an elite running back and that he's your running back one? Cortland Sutton, can he prove that he's a top-tier receiver in fantasy? So that Broncos offense is definitely one to watch. I mean, the AFC West as a whole is very loaded. They're going to go against tough competition every week. That Chargers defense is loaded. They're going to have to play them twice a year. There's other defenses out there that are tough, but I'm there with you. I think Russ is definitely in that top 3, top 5, wherever you want to put him. You know what I mean? You can't sleep on Russ this year.
I'm hoping we do get a good, Russ season, because I did earlier today before we recorded the pod, I decided to throw a quick parlay together on quarterback to throw 30 touchdowns this season. So I went Russ, I went Kirk Cousins, both at Russ was Russ was minus
interesting play.
Cousins minus 155, so both very chalky. And then I went with America's quarterback, Jameis Winston, at plus 220 to round it out. So
it's gonna pay out very well.
I hope so. Fingers crossed. It pays out. It pays out there. So yeah, we'll see how Russ does. We'll see, how Tyreek Hill does, and I'm gonna give my guy for newcomer on biggest team, and I'm gonna go, stay local here with this pick, and that's AJ Brown. we saw what this Eagles team was able to do last season with Jalen Hurts. Despite people criticizing Hurts in the passing game, it was still effective. We saw Devontae Smith almost have 1,000-yard receiving season. We saw Quez Watkins continue to become that wide receiver that many people think he can become. Dallas Goedert played a role in the passing game, but now you give Hurts and that entire offense another bona fide number one wide receiver in targeting, AJ Brown, who had a down year last year. 63 receptions on 105 targets for 869 yards and only 5 touchdowns. The previous years he had 11 touchdowns, 8 touchdowns, over 1,000 yards. But down year for him because I think he missed some time with injury. Now he walks into a situation where he doesn't have an older Julio Jones on his side. He has a younger, more explosive, no disrespect to Julio at his age, but a more explosive guy in Devontae Smith who could be a number one wide receiver somewhere else, like the Chicago Bears. It could be easy number one wide receiver. So I think AJ Brown, is going to pay huge dividends for this team. Offensively, I think fantasy wise, I think he's going to be able to pick up where he left off, because people got to understand AJ Brown was putting up numbers with a guy in Ryan Tannehill. And last time I checked, Ryan Tannehill don't have that really big of an arm. He doesn't have that special of an arm in a heavy run-centric offense. So I think AJ Brown is going to come in right away, be a big boon to this Philadelphia Eagles offense. And I think, like I said, fantasy-wise, I think he's going to eat. I think we're going to be talking about him in that top 10 weekly, wide receiver conversation. I know that's, very bold to say, because a lot of people are a little bit iffy on the quarterback in Jalen Hurts, but I think he could be that guy in fantasy this year. In fact, I have him in one of my DFS lineups where Hurts has a stack. So I'm hoping for week.
You believe in the AJ Brown. It reminded me a little bit of when Alshon got traded there, but I think in this situation, I think you have a little bit more exciting of a quarterback situation to be able to take advantage of a quarterback. Of a wide receiver that's kind of in his youthful state still, his youthful productive state. I think that's the huge part about that as well. Like you're giving this young quarterback some tools and some options as well. So we're gonna find it's another one of those situations. We're gonna find out a lot about the receiver, that did great in his prior location, and we're gonna find out a lot about him with a new quarterback. And we're gonna find out a lot about that quarterback that was previously void of downfield options that now has one. So I think it's great for all sides here. So we're going to see a lot of how this trade plays out, but it did remind me a lot of how that impact of Alshon Jeffrey coming to Philadelphia, how huge that was, of a lift, to have in that receiver core. So this is, kind of one of those same situations.
Most definitely. And Harrison, thoughts about AJ Brown, since we talk about the Eagles literally on a weekly basis here on the podcast. Thoughts on Browns, and then thoughts on any other guy, newcomer that can make that impact this year in fantasy.
Yeah, just in regards to AJ Brown, and like you said, I know we'll be getting into this for the next 17, 18 weeks, but I think the thing that he just more. Fingers crossed, right? I'll go for 2021, but I think the thing with AJ Brown and what he really brings to the offense is just that physical yards after contact receiver, and it's something the Eagles have really lacked. They just haven't had that fit, like since Alshon, really. So Keaton mentioned it. Since Alshon, they really haven't had that big body physical receiver that can go out there and make plays over the middle, that can make plays vertically. I mean, that's what they drafted J.J. Arcega-Whiteside for. It just didn't pan out. Now you're getting a proven commodity in A.J. Brown. I'm really intrigued to see what he can do in this Eagles offense. You mentioned it, Jovan. I think that he has, more than capable of a quarterback in Jalen Hurts to get him the ball this year and to see a really big year for A.J. Brown. So I like that one as well. I think just to kind of wrap it out, just kind of a low-key, underrated guy that I'll hit here quickly is Hayden Hurst, the tight end joining the Bengals, replacing C.J. Uzomah, who joined the New York Jets this year. Hayden Hurst is a guy who had wound up getting stuck behind Mark Andrews in Baltimore and then Kyle Pitts in Atlanta. So the Bengals are kind of banking on it not being a talent issue, more of an opportunity issue. If you're looking for a backup tight end, late rounds, I don't hate Hayden Hurst as a newcomer.
Hayden Hurst is a good one. That's somebody that I was, thinking about a lot, just because we saw, like you mentioned, the impact that C.J. Uzomah had in that offense, because you had to worry about Boyd, Higgins, my guy, Jamar Chase, Joe Mixon. And then it was like, oh, there's C.J. Uzomah. And it's like he actually had a pretty good year. And Hayden Hurst, for as much as he hadn't been able to live up to that expectation, him being a first round pick, like you mentioned, his situations haven't been the most favorable. Like you said, he was playing next to Mark Andrews, who's developing to one of the top three, tight ends in the league and one of the top three fantasy, tight ends. A lot of people think he could be tight end number one really in fantasy this year. So that's a good one. Hayden Hurst is definitely a good one. And like you said, someone that's going to be available in late rounds, but also someone that's going to be available on that waiver wire when the season gets underway. This is the Total Sports Live Podcast Fantasy Football Special. Me and Harrison and Keaton breaking down everything in fantasy that you need to know, the rookies, the newcomers, the sleepers, the players you should avoid, everything here on the podcast here. And fellas, we got to talk about, since I just mentioned it, we got to talk about the rookies here. For as much as people want to say this was not a good rookie class, depending on who you talk to, depending on who you listen to, even people in the card industry are saying this is a bad rookie class. For everybody that's saying that, there's actually a lot of good rookies to watch in fantasy this season, and they all surprisingly play in very, very favorable situations. Now, granted, we don't have the quarterbacks like we've had over the last few years that's going to come in and start right away and say, okay, we're giving you the ball. Week one, it's your show. However, there is a lot of good, young, talented players at the skill positions who could, make some noise. So starting with you, Harrison, who are just a couple of rookies that you are watching, that people should watch out for in fantasy this season?
Well, for anybody who pays attention to the Total Sports Live Fantasy Football League, I vastly overpaid for Treylon Burks the other day in our draft. Just kind of got caught in the moment, saw his name there, and was like, you know what, man, I trust Treylon Burks. So I'm going to start there and just validate my own mistake.
That's it. That's how you do it. Speak it into existence, Harrison. Speak it into existence.
This is a guy who Arkansas used in so many different ways, and that's really where I get intrigued. Obviously, Tennessee has a unique offense. They have Derrick Henry. They're adding in Robert Woods. They're really starting over at receiver, transitioning from Ryan Tannehill to Malik Willis. I see that happening at some point this year. But when it comes to Treylon Burks, Arkansas was using him on jet sweeps. Arkansas was using him on quick little screens, and then they're using him downfield over the middle. This is a guy who can get the job done so many ways. People in the pre-draft process were calling him a 6'3", 225 version of Deebo Samuel. So I hear that, and that immediately catches my attention for fantasy football. Like I said, I vastly overpaid. I might wait a few more rounds than I did. Maybe sit back 8th, 9th, 10th round for Treylon Burks. You're going to have to consider if you want Treylon Burks or Robert Woods, which is a tough pick that I was in. I was like, I don't know if I go with the vet or the rookie. I went with Treylon Burks. I went upside. It might have been a mistake. You know what I mean? Robert Woods might be the guy for fantasy, but that's when I'll go there. And then just quickly, I'm going to touch on Sky Moore for my second one. I'm intrigued by Sky Moore. The Chiefs pass catching situation outside of Juju and Travis Kelce, it gets really murky. You know what I mean? Nobody really knows if you want Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Sky Moore, Mecole Hardman. You don't exactly know where to go. If Sky Moore is sitting there late, you know what I mean? I just don't really see what the problem is. If it doesn't wind up panning out or if he gets hurt early in the year, cut him. You know what I mean? But if he's there, 13th, 14th round, he's joining the Chiefs offense. They need a quick, speedy playmaker. Like Sky Moore made a lot of plays at Central Michigan with Caleb Ellaby. They were a dynamic duo. I know that was one of Jovan and Emery's guys in the pre-draft process. This was a guy who was catching 11 balls a game in some certain situations. You know what I mean? So I'm intrigued by Sky Moore with the Chiefs as well.
Sky Moore is a good one, a good candidate because, like you said, you look at the situation again. I think people forget this in fantasy, right? The casual fantasy football player just goes by names or people who they heard talk about on ESPN, et cetera, et cetera. But when you mention a guy like, for example, like you said, in Sky Moore, you look at the situation. The situation is very favorable for him to succeed. So, like you said, it's worth taking that risk with one of your last three picks because, again, there's no Tyreek Hill. There's no Byron Pringle. I did the math. That's over 209. That's 219 targets that is missing from that offense. They got to go somewhere, right? Travis Kelce is not taking on 219 targets. If he did, that would be record breaking. We would never see anything like that before. So that means it has to go somewhere. It has to go to Juju. It has to go to MVS. It has to go to Mecole Hardman. And it has to go to a guy like Sky Moore. So definitely agree with you and like the idea of taking a guy like Sky Moore in the later rounds of your fantasy draft. What about you, Keaton? Who are some of the rookies that people should watch out for from your angle?
I'm gonna go homer pick on this one. I'm gonna go George Pickens. Yeah, I think it's a fantastic pick. I think if you look at the Steelers' history of drafting wide receivers just in the last, I don't know, you can go back about 8 or 9 seasons. It's absurd. It really is. How many good receivers come out of that camp? I think Pickens is the next in line, absolutely. And I know there's a lot of folks this offseason that have been saying, yeah, but Claypool. I think Claypool's an immense talent in this offense. I still see him as the number 3. I'm going to stay by that, that I think that he'll be the number 3 in this offense. I think if there's 2 wide receivers that can soak up especially a bulk of receptions, a lot of leagues, PPR as well. If you're looking for a guy that's going to be able to get you more receptions per game, obviously Deontay would be number 1 on that list, but behind him, I think Pickens has the skill set to be able to handle a high workload of passes as well. This is another situation where we'll likely see Kenny Pickett sometime this season. I don't know when, but at some point we will see him. And Pickett's a slinger. I think whenever he's in the game, they're going to want to throw the football more completions, more Pickens. I think in that situation, then Claypool will have the advantage. So if you're looking for one of those picks that's not necessarily going to be available too long in the draft, but certainly after the first couple of rounds or so, then absolutely, I think George Pickens is a great steal there for a Steelers offense that's trying to find its footing and is likely going to try and find its footing mostly through the air once Pickett is there.
Yeah, Pickens, another good wide receiver that's in a very favorable situation. And again, you might say to yourself, how is it a favorable situation when we don't know when Mitch Trubisky is the quarterback? Again, we saw what the Steelers did last season. They were still throwing the ball with Ben Roethlisberger, and his arm was shot. They were still throwing the ball. Passing plays were run plays in the Steelers offense last year.
Unfortunately, as painful as that was to be able to watch. But I mean, same offensive coordinator coming back again this year as well. So, the mentality is going to be there, whether it's Trubisky or it's Pickett or God forbid someone else in that offense, they're going to want to throw the football a lot. And I think that that's going to mean that those outside receivers are going to have to be extremely active. And I do like that combination of Pickens and Johnson outside, just kind of dominating while you have Claypool able to stretch the field and kind of toss the ball up. He's good for all kinds of quarterbacks, Claypool is. So I do think, it's not that I don't think that Claypool will be a factor. I just think that Pickens will be a much bigger factor in this offense than a lot of people are sort of giving him credit for so far.
That's a good one. I like both. So we got Treylon Burks, we got Sky Moore, we got George Pickens. I'm going to stay on the wide receiver trend here since that's what we're doing here.
That's what we're doing
on the pod. I'm going with Jalen Tolbert. This is a guy I've been kind of, even though he's a Cowboy, right? I'm kind of been screaming from the high tops, like, hey, draft Jalen Tolbert. Hey, bet on Jalen Tolbert to lead rookies in receiving yards this year. Hey, possibly bet on him to win offensive rookie of the year, just because of the situation that the Cowboys offense is currently in. We know Mike McCarthy loves to throw the football. He showed that to us last year, and they're not going to just overnight change and become a running football team. They're going to run the ball, but their identity is they're going to throw the football. The problem is with that, Michael Gallup is working his way back, from an injury. He was activated off the PUP off the PUP list, so that is good, positive. That will hopefully see him within this first month of regular season. But James Washington, I think he broke his foot. And James Washington, he's out, for about 6 to 10 weeks with a fractured foot or something along those lines. So without those two, Amari Cooper's going, Cedric Wilson is going. That's about 160 something, 170 something targets. Somebody's got to take those. Dalton Schultz is going to get his. CeeDee Lamb's going to get his. I think this is a prime opportunity for a guy like Jalen Tolbert to step up and fill that void. Again, a guy that you're not going to take early. I'm not going to recommend, take, Jalen Tolbert early. Like, if he's there in round 8, go ahead and do it. No. But if Jalen Tolbert is there in rounds 10, 11, 12, 13, you give it a consideration, just because he's going to get the target share that early on, week 1, we're going to see he's going to get the target share, because who else does Dallas have at wide receiver outside of CeeDee Lamb and then Dalton Schultz? They do have Tony Pollard, who, we've heard that they're going to get him the ball and in the passing game, have him line up at wide receiver. Cool. But, You drafted Jalen Tolbert for a reason, so we're going to see how they use him and how quickly he can start making plays in that offense. And then for another rookie, I'm gonna point out, and that is Jahan Dotson for the Washington Commanders. Again, another favorable situation. Granted, the quarterback play is it's a little iffy. Carson Wentz is the new starter in Washington. We're not talking Alex Smith. We're not talking Taylor Heineke. We're talking Carson Wentz, and we know how Wentz ended his tenure in Philly. We saw how it went in Indianapolis. The stats say that he played good, but when you watch the games, it wasn't that good. So you're hoping that he turns it around and can figure it out. And for a guy like Jahan Dotson, he enters a situation in Washington where he is wide receiver too. It's Terry McLaurin, it's Jahan Dotson, it's Curtis Samuel, Cam Sims. Not a bad wide receiving core. Jahan Dotson comes in, he's automatically wide receiver 2 playing on the outside, giving Carson Wentz a deep threat that he hasn't had since Torrey Smith. He hasn't had literally since Torrey Smith.
Maybe.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, it's Torrey Smith, Quez, Deshaun Jackson for a hot minute.
Right.
So he hasn't had that deep threat, and he finally has one in Dotson. And we saw, obviously, over the last few seasons what Dotson was able to do at Penn State with not great quarterback play. He didn't have Tracy McSorley throwing to him. He had Sean Clifford throwing to him, who's like in his 6th year, I think, something along those lines. So, and he was still able to make plays and do something. So I think Jahan Dotson, again, is another one who, unlike those wide receivers, I don't think he's going to be drafted in a lot of places. I think he's a guy that's going to just, sit there on the waiver wire, and then he's going to have this game this season versus like Jahan Dotson had 5 catches for 75 yards in a touchdown. It's going to be like everybody's going to go
load him up on your roster now.
Everybody's going to go log on and be like, all right, I'm selecting Jahan Dotson. I'm picking him up off of waiver wires because I'm trying to beat everybody else to the punch. So those are my 2 rookies, fellas. That to be watched out for. I think we've picked and put together a solid list of rookies to watch out for.
Most def. Newcomers of their own right.
Definitely newcomers of their own right. Let's move on. We got to talk about the negative, not so much the negative side of fantasy, but a little negative here portion of the show, and that is players to avoid. Each year, there's always a select group of players that you're like, if they're available, you might not want to draft them, or if they're there, you might want to wait for them just because of the situation, or more so just what they didn't do last season. There's a good core of players who we have listed as players to avoid this year. Starting with you, Harrison, just who do you think is one player to avoid this year that fantasy owners should probably just be a tad bit hesitant and not just go super gung ho and be like, I'm taking him no matter what. This is what it is. And the story, he's a starter. Day 1, boom.
I'm a little concerned with what David Montgomery is going to do this year out in Chicago. I understand there's, the running back position gets thin in fantasy and you have to go get a running back 2 somewhere. I just don't know if David Montgomery is exactly who I'd want to go into the season with for a couple reasons. You look at it first thing, it's the final year of his rookie contract. They're in a new offensive system this year out in Chicago. And we've got Khalil Herbert right there ready to, kind of burst onto the scene as a dynamic playmaker, not just in fantasy, but obviously on the field as well. We've seen some good things from David Montgomery at different points in his career. This is a guy who can score a lot of touchdowns for you when the offense is firing on all cylinders. I think that was more so in Matt Nagy's first year, that year where Trubisky had a really good year. That's kind of when we saw David Montgomery being a valuable fantasy play. Last year, when we saw that Bears offense really fluttering, not doing much, it wasn't there as much. So, I think the Bears will take some steps forward. We obviously had Chris Shanafeld on last week, got a great Bears rundown. Anybody who wants to hear a little bit more about the Bears should go check that out. But I just don't know if I'd want to go into the season with David Montgomery as my starting running back. And I'll just give you a quick one here at tight end. He's a little bit later anyway, but I wouldn't really want to go into the season with Mike Gesicki as my starting tight end. I think he's a boomer bust guy. I just don't really – he's not a reliable enough tight end. I think there's other guys out there you can get. Even if you don't get one of the top 4, I'd much rather go into the season with TJ Hawkinson, Dallas Goedert, Zach Ertz. I just see those guys over Gesicki, even with the boost that the Dolphins offense is going to have this year. I really wouldn't want to go into the season with Gesicki as my tight end.
Yeah, that just Gesicki one is a tough one because it's a name floating out there that could be available at a juicy spot in the draft, and you think, oh man, cash out. Let me get a big name, that somebody probably passed on, and I think that's fool's gold in that situation as well. I mean, so if you fell into that trap last year, of course, you very much so know, like, not happening again. But yeah, for others that may be looking at that as an opportunity, not so much. But if I had to go with a player, I think I'd go with probably Trey Lance on this one. This was tough for me because I feel like this offense is going to be a lot better with a quarterback that has the skills that Trey Lance has, if that makes any sense, right? That very well could be Trey Lance, but we just don't know enough about that at this point. I think Shanahan is a very smart guy when it comes to football, and especially the offensive part of football as well. So I think he's going to try and put his quarterback in the best position that he can to win. I don't think he cares about fantasy stats and how many touchdowns that he throws or runs or whatever else like that. This offense could really look a lot different than what the potential is that we all have in our minds. Like, we're putting Trey Lance into a system where he has weapons and he has a run game and a solid defense as well, and all of that makes sense. But I think Shanahan is the real mastermind behind this, and a 22-year-old quarterback who's still very much so, I think, learning the NFL, that has now, as of recently, has the veteran quarterback that's been, that's had that job over the last couple of years now, breathing down his neck on the bench. Not that he's, in danger of taking it over, but he's there, and so I think that, to avoid that being an awkward situation or something that becomes tough on the rookie, I think Shanahan's going to put that offense in the best position that they can to win. That's probably going to involve a lot of running, a lot of running. Maybe he's a part of that as well, but I just don't think that he'll be the big powerhouse that a lot of folks are envisioning that he'll be for that offense.
Most definitely. And I think, and specifically Trey Lance, if you're drafting him, you're drafting him more so for upside. You're drafting him saying, I think you're drafting him is like, you're drafting him for like future QB1, meaning like if you're playing season long standard league, you're hoping, all right, by like week 5, you're like, I can comfortably start him for like the rest of the year. But you have that very good QB2 sitting behind him. Like, if things go sour, I'm turning the reins over to Jameis Winston at QB2 immediately,
right,
over a guy like Trey Lance. And Trey Lance could be almost to what Jalen Hurts was last year, right? Jalen Hurts was a guy who was a consistent, we could say for the most part, was a consistent 20-point per game scorer in standard leagues. Like, if he didn't score, if he didn't throw a touchdown, he definitely ran for one, and that definitely, boosted up his fantasy points and fantasy ranking. So Trey Lance is one of those guys who, like you said, still learning the game, learning the NFL, didn't really start many games last year. In the games that he started, you could tell he was still a little rough around the edges. If I'm not mistaken, he didn't even really start. He didn't really play that much in college. If I'm not mistaken,
right.
like 16 games or something like that. Like,
yeah, not many at all. It was a big part of his draft process was that people were worried that he just didn't have that much experience.
And that's a little bit concerning because it says, okay, he's still very raw in his progression as a quarterback, developing from going from college to now the pros. So Trey Lance is a good one. David Montgomery is a good one, especially, again, you're looking at handcuff situation with Khalil Herbert, who we saw last year, was able to make plays and actually be able to be a very productive runner when he got playing time. So both of them very, very good options there when we're talking about players to avoid. And for me, this one is going to be tough to say, even though there was like 3 other guys I wanted to go with. I wanted to go with Rashard Penny. No shade to Keaton on that one. I wanted to go with
no I felt it. I'm gonna eat that rock this year. But I got caught in this. I meant to say this about David Montgomery too. Your comment about David Montgomery, not a bad pick in theory. But if you're in that situation where like I need another running back and your options are guys like Penny and Montgomery, you've already messed up. It's too late. A lot of people are going to be watching this after your draft to understand that if you have one of these guys on your team, you're probably thinking the same thing. Like, that's why. I just want to explain my penny pick. That's all. But anyway, go ahead.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I ain't gonna hold you. I was a little puzzled. I was like, Rashard Penny, I can't even stay healthy.
Yeah, risky pick, but we're hoping the upside. The upside.
Yeah, right. The upside. You're hoping
when you need an RB2. When you
right,
need an RB2.
you're hoping that what he showed last year when he was healthy is like if he can stay healthy, he can put some yards together. The key is him, actually
staying on the field.
Healthy. That's the problem. That's the problem. And I wanted to go Mac Jones, but I don't want to get in my diatribe about that one.
Not a Mac Jones guy. You're not a Mac Jones guy.
No, I think Michael McCorkle is very overrated. I think he played in a very kid friendly offense that I think anybody could succeed in. I mean, I remember the game against on Monday Night Football where he only threw the ball 6 times, and granted it was like a big like that. Granted, it was like a big windstorm. It was like 40-mile-per-hour gust in Buffalo. I get it, but 6 times, come on, man. The dude, you want to talk about the definition of Captain Checkdown? Come on, man. If you were starting Mac Jones, and God forbid I had to do it a couple of weeks, it was only because my quarterback was on bye week, so I get it. He's not going to garner you no points, man. No. Like, if you get 15 points or 16, 17 points for Mac Jones, you'll take it. But you just better hope everybody else on your roster
it goes off.
You have to hope they snap. But I don't want to continue to talk about Mac. Go in on Mac Jones. I'm going to talk about Miles Sanders. Not so much a guy you should avoid because this is a contract year. This is a huge year for him to get a new contract, either an extension with the Eagles or elsewhere. It's more so of a player who you should wait on, meaning that we all got burnt by Miles Sanders last year. He didn't score no touchdowns. He didn't have a single rushing touchdown, which is just unfathomable to think about, especially with the quarterback he was playing with. We saw the previous season before in a short stint, hey, this Jalen Hurts Miles Sanders combo could really do some work, and it never materialized last year for various reasons. I mean, Jordan Howard saw the end zone more than Miles Sanders. Kenneth Gainwell saw the end zone more than Miles Sanders. Boston Scott saw the end zone more than Miles Sanders. I mean, shoot, they lucky Jason Huntley didn't get a game. He could have found the end zone for Miles Sanders. But for Miles Sanders, for me, and I'm a big Miles Sanders guy. I'm a huge Miles Sanders fan. I'm always the one that's always saying and tweeting during Eagles game day, feed Miles Sanders, rinse and repeat. Because he has the talent. He's just got to score. And that's the MO in fantasy. The same thing with Gesicki. He gets the yards, he gets the receptions, but tight ends, if you're not Andrews, Kittle, Waller, Kelsey, you got to score touchdowns. And Miles Sanders is in the position where he's very touchdown dependent. So for me, it's more so wait on him, like I did in our draft. I saw Miles Sanders continue to drop. I don't know if it was like round 9, round 10. I was like, you know what? He's dropping crazy now. He's dropping. So I was like, I gotta take a bet on him. If he pans out, it pans out. If it doesn't, oh well. But I'm going to take the shot on him because I know that if he plays with his potential, he can be that borderline RB1 that we saw and that we know he can become. But on the downside, it's this guy could literally get outplayed by like Damian Pierce and James Robinson. Like that is like a complete thought. Like Cordero Patterson could outplay him. Like
wow,
those are the thoughts that you have just in your mind, fellas. That's just my train of thought on the entire situation.
And one thing with Miles Sanders is that he literally said a few months ago to John Clark on NBC, "I don't care about fantasy football. Don't draft me on your team." You know what I mean? Like, you don't really got to look too much into that. Like, it kind of tells you what you need to know. The Eagles are going to use a running back rotation. They're going to use different guys in different settings. And you mentioned it, Jovan. This is Miles Sanders' contract year, and I know this is something we'll get into down the line. I think it's his last year with the Eagles, to be honest. I don't really – unless he has a crazy year, I don't see many ways that they go out and pay Miles Sanders a lot of money. He's already getting to that older part of his career. Running backs have a very short, NFL career span. But Yeah, I'm with you there. I'm definitely avoiding Miles Sanders as well. I think he's kind of in that David Montgomery role where if Miles Sanders is your running back too, you have a little bit of pause after the draft. You're a little worried.
Most definitely, you're worried. So I'm hoping for myself and anybody that has Miles Sanders shares on their fantasy team, or if you're gonna roster him in DFS, you're hoping.
Hey, right now, Rashad Penny for Miles Sanders, straight up.
I ain't doing that. I ain't doing that, man.
We got a trade on the table.
Live.
I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that.
No, you know what was crazy was like I was kind of using, and maybe some other people might use this as a strategy too, but I was using Miles Sanders as kind of like my line of running backs. Like once Miles Sanders was drafted in our draft, I knew that I was going to be in trouble. So, in terms of a running back too, right? Like, so I was like, or just a running back period, like anything after Miles Sanders. And there's certain players like that at every position that you kind of lock in and you say, once this player's off the board, everyone underneath this is going to be a real big question mark at the very least. And that's who it was in our draft, was Miles Sanders for me. And it probably was the round before I picked Penny. I don't know, who knows? But you know that Miles Sanders is that guy. The fact that he is that guy is probably a reason to stay away from him in general. There is a chance there that, yes, he could have a great season, but, you know, just not a lot of motivating factors that give you confidence that that's going to happen.
None at all.
Don't reach.
Yeah, that's the big thing. Do not reach on Miles Sanders. If he continues to drop, then you take your chance. But like Keaton said, use that as like your line of like when he drops, be prepared because the run will continue to happen, and you better hope that you're in that next in line. You know,
don't be me with Rashard Penny.
No, listen. I would take Darrell Henderson over Rashard Penny.
That's a good underrated guy this year is Darrell Henderson. He was nice last year, and people are just out on him for Cam Akers. This is off topic, but I saw him on our waiver wire a few minutes ago. And I was like, hold on.
There he is. Yeah, he's out
right.
there.
What's going on here?
It's an interesting handcuff to Cam Akers if you have Cam Akers in your league, but yeah.
Most definitely, for sure. So this is Total Sports Live Podcast. We got one more segment before we wrap. Really appreciate everyone that's checking out and that will be checking out this podcast. We got to talk about Fantasy Player of the Year. It's always a good topic of conversation because you're always trying to figure out who's going to be that guy that's just going to set the fantasy world on fire. Just like, damn, like he really balled out this year. And I think we saw that last year, right? Extra game. We saw some ridiculous stats. Cooper Kupp wins the Triple Crown at wide receiver, and Jonathan Taylor, if it wasn't for Aaron Rodgers, probably should have won MVP. If we want to be real, Hilmer Cooper Kupp probably should have won MVP. But those were the two guys in fantasy where it was like, it doesn't matter if they got a cold, if the arm is falling off, if the offensive line only got 4 guys on it, you're starting them no matter what. No matter what the matchup. They could be going against the best run defense. You're still starting Jonathan Taylor. Cooper Kupp could be facing the best DBs on a weekly basis or have a tough matchup. You're still starting them because you know they're just in this different level and next level zone, fellas. So while saying that, I want to know who are your guys' fantasy player of the year.
Well, I'm staying home again on this one, and I'm going to go with it. So this was tough for me. I actually, because I wanted to get that kind of like a real underrated pick here. So I was going to go with Devontae Adams out there in Oakland, but it's too dependent. I'm sorry, man. Where's the bell? Ding for me. One on that. Out in Vegas, but it's too dependent on what the quarterback is going to do there. I love Derek Carr. I don't love him that much. But so I'm going to go with my number 2 pick on the list, which is Najee Harris. I think last year was an absolute volume machine. And that was in an offense, as you mentioned, Jovan, that seemed like it forgot how to spell R-U-N. Maybe the back half of the playbook got blown away in a Pittsburgh rainstorm sometime, and Matt Canada had absolutely no idea how to do it. Maybe that was it. Even still in that year where it seemed kind of weird how everything was being set up, Najee was an absolute gold mine in terms of volume. And we still didn't see, I think, what his absolute potential could be behind a very bad offensive line last year in Pittsburgh, a quarterback that was more statue than, anything else back there. And
he was just
he was certainly there in an offense that clearly begs for a quarterback with mobility, with time, or with the ability to make time and throw the ball downfield. Throw the ball a lot more when the pocket collapses. That includes down the field. So I think with the offense sort of unleashed a bit, even though it could be a little rough there with Trubisky at first, I think Najee Harris only goes up from here and could be that second-year player that really takes over as maybe another top 3 to 5 running back in the league. Like, you consider him in that top tier because he can catch the ball, he can run so hard after contact as well. And with a lot of quarterbacks with a few quarterbacks rather on the roster where you're not really sure exactly how effective they're going to be down the field, it could mean a lot of Najee Harris in that offense. So a volume guy, high volume guy last year, a guy that's going to get at least that much volume this year, and I think do a lot better as well. Najee Harris is my sneaky pick.
Najee Harris, fantasy player of the year. I mean, like you said, he's going to get the volume. I mean,
certainly going to get it. Yeah.
They cut Anthony McFarland. Benny Snell is
Benny Snell.
Benny Snell. There's nothing you get excited about when you say Benny Snell's running the ball for 2.9 yards.
Oh gosh, Benny Snell is almost a curse word in my house.
Benny Snell, watch your mouth.
Hey.
So Najee Harris is a good one because he could get it. You just worry about what the list Frank sprain that he's dealing with. Even though Mike Tomlin, I think, said that's really nothing to worry about here. But again, we're talking about a list Frank.
Yeah, that's pretty serious. Story. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You hope that just doesn't become a lingering issue, because if that becomes a lingering issue, then Steelers' offense might be cooked without Najee.
I would agree. It absolutely goes through him, and obviously they're going to be playing to win the game, as we've heard before. So I think he's going to get a lot of volume.
James Conner's not walking through that door again.
That's right.
Rashard Mendenhall ain't walking through that door again.
Oh, and thank goodness he's not. You're preaching now.
What about you, Harrison? I know you have a running back who you think is being really underappreciated right now in fantasy and could be that fantasy player of the year. And if he does, and if he becomes fantasy player of the year, I mean, if he does, then that means he's putting up some massive numbers also from that vaunted AFC North division.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're staying in the AFC North for this Fantasy Player of the Year conversation, but I'm going to go with Nick Chubb, a guy who on ESPN's list is running back 16 right now, which I just think is kind of crazy considering this is a guy who's averaged 5 yards per carry in his first five consecutive seasons in the NFL. That would tie the most for any such player in NFL history if he does this year. He has 4 seasons with that. But this is a guy who last year had 1,259 yards, second in the NFL behind Jonathan Taylor. The stat that really catches my eye from Pro Football Focus is 967 rush yards after contact. So this is a guy who's breaking off tackles. He's very tough to tackle. We know that. I mean, if you watch Nick Chubb, you know that. I think that some of the concern regarding Nick Chubb definitely has to be around Kareem Hunt and just the uncertainty of that offense as well. What I'll say to that is Kareem Hunt has already had some trade discussions, through training camp and things of that nature. We could see Kareem Hunt on another team before week 8. And even if Kareem Hunt stays in Cleveland, we've seen the past few years that they've been able to coexist perfectly fine. You know what I mean? These two are both guys that are going to put up fantasy numbers. Now, granted, could they cut into each other's carries? Could we see more of one or the other if they were in a solo backfield like Najee Harris is in? And that's why Najee is so attractive this year and so enticing at that 6, 7, 8 pick. And might be why Nick Chubb is at running back 16 and falling to second and third rounds in fantasy drafts. But I just think that's crazy for a guy who's averaging 5 yards per carry. I mean, if you're getting 5 yards a pop and at the volume that they give Nick Chubb the ball, especially with a questionable quarterback situation for 11, 13 weeks this year, at minimum, I think it's a questionable situation, even if Deshaun comes back, this year, because Deshaun hasn't played in 2 years. And, what are we going to get from Deshaun Watson? All the off the field terrible things aside, if you're just looking at it on the field, is Deshaun Watson going to be ready to, come out there and throw the ball 40 times in week 13? No, they're going to have to run the ball. So intrigued by Nick Chubb. I think running back 16 is way too low for a guy that we've seen prove it over these past few years that he can really put up points in fantasy. And Jovan, you mentioned with a few other guys, this is a guy who scores touchdowns too. We've seen Nick Chubb have those 2-3 touchdown games where he's getting 28 points in fantasy, 30 points in fantasy. That can really change the dynamic of a week for you in fantasy. So I'm in on Nick Chubb this year.
Yeah, Nick Chubb is another tremendous option. And you look at what he did in fantasy last year. He only last year he had 195 fantasy points in standard leagues, according to Pro Football Reference, which isn't better than what he did in 2020, but not what he did in 2019, which was 219 fantasy points. However, he was still productive, still had 1,000 yards. He still had 1,000 yard receiving and had 8 rushing touchdowns. He's had 3 straight years of 1,000 yards. He almost had 4 straight years as a rookie and missed out by 4 yards. So Nick Chubb has been one of the more consistent running backs. And I was telling Harrison this before the show, is that I was putting together a DFS lineup on Yahoo, and he was like, I want to say because they have their salary cap is a $200 budget, which is interesting. So obviously running backs are priced, $30, whatever, 20-something dollars. I think he was around like $16, which I thought was very low just going into this season in week 1 against the Carolina Panthers defense, which is middle of the road and run and stopping the run. But I think Nick Chubb can have a monster game in week 1. And if he has a monster game in week 1, I think that sets the tone for him to be fantasy player of the year. And again, we're going to stay in the AFC North because why not? Surprisingly, all our picks came out the AFC North. No one did not plan this whatsoever. I was going to go with the homer pick of Jalen Hurts, but that would have just been super just OD if I did that. So I'm going to my fantasy player of the year. I'm going to go with Lamar Jackson. I think, a lot of people have been talking crazy about Lamar this offseason, acting like that man did not win an MVP. We're talking about people putting Justin Herbert ahead of him, talking about putting Josh Allen ahead of him. Granted, okay, if you want to do that, I hear you. Want to put Mahomes ahead of him? I'm okay with that, 100%. But Herbert, who hasn't won a playoff game, and Josh Allen, who all right, he's cool. I respect what Josh Allen does. However, I think there's a lot of disrespect to how much Lamar means to that team. It means to that offense. And now, granted, I understand people say, well, you saw what Tyler Huntley was able to do last year, and replace Lamar. It's really good. And don't get me, I'm a big Tyler Huntley fan. I think Huntley is a very good quarterback, but he ain't Lamar Jackson. There's only one Lamar Jackson. It's like when we talk about Michael Vick. Yes, some quarterbacks might have that ability to run like Michael Vick.
But you ain't Michael Vick.
Right. You ain't no Vick. You don't have the arm like Vick. And I think a lot of people are going to realize that Lamar is due for a bounce back year. This was a Ravens team last year who they were still in playoff contention despite numerous injuries to the offensive line. Running back room was decimated to the point they was running out Le'Veon Bell, who's boxing now. Le'Veon Bell, Devontae Freeman, Latavius Murray. It's a shame Tyson Williams didn't get more carries. I thought he probably should have, to be honest with you. They lost Justice Hill in the last offseason. He lost.
I thought Jamal Lewis was going to come bursting through that door at any point. Let's keep running the football.
I mean, I'm old. I'm surprised Patrick Ricard didn't get like 10 carries a game with the way they were going. But they were still productive. He was still productive, and he had 16 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. Not a Lamar-ish type game. He still, I think he had over 700 rushing yards, if I'm not mistaken. Last year, I'm looking this up right now as we're recording this podcast. 16 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. Very not a good year for him. And he had 767 rushing yards, which is pretty good, but only had 2 rushing touchdowns. Not so good. But we know that when Lamar's locked in, when the offense is healthy, he can do special and big things. And I think we're only going to see that this year, especially because this is a contract year for him, and there hasn't been no movements on the contract. And the regular season is becoming very soon approaching, and I don't see them doing no deal during the season. So they don't. This is a showcase not only for him, not only for the Ravens, but for other teams. And I think he's going to put the league back on notice that that he's still one of the top 10, 5 to 10 quarterbacks in the league. So I like Lamar as the fantasy player of the year. We know when Lamar's on a roll, he can put up monster numbers, and now he has Mark Andrews back. He has an exciting rookie tight end and Isaiah Likely, and the wide receiver core. A lot of people not talking about because Hollywood Brown is going. They traded him away to Arizona, but they have Rashad Bateman, they have Devin Duvernay, they have Tylan Wallace, they have James Prochet, a young wide receiver core
Very young,
who a lot of people are not focused on, but also could make some noise this season. So if Lamar does what he does with the offense piece that he has around him, he should be in the running for fantasy player of the year.
Yeah. On top of that, and I think that he's going to use that as motivation. Look, if this team's going to win this year, and I said this last year about this team as well, but with Lamar Jackson, if this team's going to win this year, it's going to be because of Lamar Jackson. We were saying that last year because their running back just got hurt right at the beginning of the season, before the beginning of the season, and then, I was just like 3 running backs got hurt, I think, at the beginning of the season. So we were saying, look, if the team's going to win, it's going to be Lamar. Well, this year, it's a get money year for Lamar. I think he's going to – when we see locked in Lamar, that's like starting to get up there in terms of like scariest individuals in the league that you don't want to see. You don't want to see locked in Tom Brady. You don't want to see locked in Matthew Stafford with that new offense. You don't want to see locked in Lamar whenever the game is within grasp. And I think the idea that they didn't necessarily go out and get him a big name at wide receiver, I think he's going to use that as motivation. I think he's going to say, bet, I will do it myself if necessary. If these receivers can't take me there, I'll do it myself. Trade away, Hollywood Brown, that's cool. I'll do it myself. Maybe with some help from Mark Andrews, of course. But I think either way, he's going to use it as motivation. That's a great pick because the Ravens winning this year is certainly going to be on the back of number 8.
Yeah, and I think it always has been ever since he's taken over as a starter. Lamar has a .755 winning percentage since he took over as starter. Started out the career 24-6 before last year. They went 7-5 in games that Lamar started. This is a guy who just wins football games. And we've talked about Lamar. I remember we talked about him a lot last year. Keaton, you mentioned it. If they're going to win, it's on Lamar's back. That's the case this year as well. Last year with that Lamar and Jovan, you mentioned it. We're both really big Tyler Huntley guys. I think Tyler Huntley is definitely one of the 32. I think he's one of the 32 starting quarterbacks in the NFL. It might not have shaken out that way this offseason, but I think time will prove that right. Last year, they went 1-4 without Lamar, 19.8 points per game, dropped from 395 yards per game with Lamar to 339 without. So, it's just a huge drop when that team doesn't have Lamar on the field. I'm with you. I think he's going to be the fantasy quarterback of the year. I also think that, not that he's not, not that they're comparing to each other, and I'm sure they have a good relationship, but I just think it definitely didn't go unnoticed for Lamar that Joe Burrow had that explosive year last year and went to the Super Bowl. And now Joe Burrow is the cream of the crop in the AFC North. He's the young quarterback. Yeah. Whoa. We got Lamar Jackson still out here. Lamar Jackson has an MVP. You mentioned
who has an MVP.
I'm very in on not just Lamar. I'm in on the Ravens this year too. No offense, Keaton, go Steelers. You know what I mean? Let's see what Kenny Pickett's got. He's a Jersey guy. You're not going to catch any Kenny Pickett slack over here. I am very in on the Baltimore Ravens. I think people are forgetting about them. I think the Bengals' explosion last year does not take away from what they have going on in Baltimore. A lot of injuries. You guys mentioned it. The running backs last year. Lamar missed a lot of time. If you're looking for a futures bet, a team that's going to make a little playoff run, big fan of Baltimore.
I like it. Dropping some future bets here at the end of the show. So
right.
If you got that phone out while you're listening, open up them sports bet naps and drop some dollar bills before you finish listening to this pod. So yeah, a lot of great discussion, fellas. This was excellent. A lot of great discussion going around the NFL in about an hour. Amazing how we did that, going around the league, touching on a lot of different topics that probably a lot of people are probably thinking about but haven't really talked about in their mind. They're probably having these conversations with their friends, people in their league, thinking about, what do you think about this? What do you think about that on social media? So glad that we were able to bring that conversation to the forefront here on the podcast. So that's pretty much going to wrap this one up. However, before we go, make sure you follow the podcast at Total Sports Live. Make sure you check out TotalSportsLive.com. Follow the podcast on Spotify, Apple, Google, Anchor.fm, all them other places where you can get your podcast. It's all there. Just search TSL Podcast. Again, download, follow us, leave a rating, subscribe, whatever you got to do. Make sure you're sticking them
All the clicks.
Yeah, all
people,
the clicks.
All the clicks.
All the clicks on the podcast. If you want to see us continue to do more fantasy podcasts during the football season, it's definitely an idea we've thrown around. If you want us to see us do a weekly episode here on TSL Podcast, let us know. Tune in, share it when it goes live. Make sure you let us know if you want to see and hear more of this. Fellas, any last words that we got? Anything you want to plug? Before we wrap up.
Just want to thank Keaton for coming on, man. Always a pleasure to talk to my guy Keaton. We don't get to chat like this very often, so it's just fun to get on here and talk with you, man. Really appreciate you taking the time. Make sure everybody's checking out his socials, everything that he's got going on. But for us, like Jovan said, man, everybody check out TotalSportsLive.com. It's football season. This is our wheelhouse. This is when we start podcasting, putting out articles. So definitely just stay tapped in. Appreciate everyone tuning in.
Most def. I echo that. Definitely check out everybody's work that is on this podcast as well. That's the way that you support, and it's good work. It's great work. You do it every single day. So people always say, hey, how can I support? That's a good way of doing it, liking and sharing the podcast. But also check out the stuff that Jovan and Harrison are writing. It's amazing stuff as well. I appreciate you guys for having me on the podcast. Just one real quick thing about the NFL. I think this year, you said it at the very beginning of the podcast show, is that I think this year has been a big reset in the NFL. A lot of thrones have been reshuffled and rejumbled, so it's going to be an exciting year. It's going to be a great year to follow us as we kind of continue to break down what's happening week by week, because it's going to constantly be changing. Your expectations are going to constantly be changed, I think, this season. So I'm looking forward to it, man.
I think we're all looking forward to it, and it's going to be a fun season. I think we'll see it in the first Thursday night game between the Bills and the Rams, and then it's just going to continue. I think week one we're going to see some crazy things, in terms of results that we probably do not expect. There's always those couple of upsets where you're like, did that really happen? And is this team actually going to win? Is this team actually going to do something big now? So hey. We're going to see. We're going to see what happens here. And again, appreciate everybody for tuning in and checking out the podcast. Thanks again. Like I said, be following us on all our streaming platforms: Twitter, Total Sports Live. Follow us all there. Follow Harrison on Twitter at Harry Brown-Russo. Follow Keaton on Twitter. And I don't know,
Keaton D. Nichols.
Yes, Keaton D. Nichols on Twitter. I should have known that, but it's just not clicking to me at this time of night. Make sure you follow all those guys on Twitter. We'll talk to you all very soon. Like Harrison says, football season, so be on the lookout. A lot of stuff on the way, especially here on the podcast. A lot of pod episodes coming to you fast and furious here on the TSL Podcast. Everyone have a good one. Talk to you all very soon.